The rain poured down, soaking everything. The building stood silent under the storm, as if holding its breath. Two figures stood watch, their faces hidden by wide hats. They seemed like silent guardians, unmoved by the weather. One of the men at the table declared that someone was a wicked demon. The other two listened intently, their expressions unreadable. The speaker continued, saying that not only did someone take away all his assets, his voice was filled with rage. Jin Libong, the Grand Master of the Treasure Merchant Alliance, finished his rant. The vicious scumbag had even cut off his fingers, he said, his face contorted with fury. Jin Libong looked serious as he spoke. He warned the listener not to underestimate him, because he was ready to pay for revenge. The treasure merchant was determined to get back at the person who wronged him. Phantom asked if he had any particular characteristics of the target, like a portrait. The best assassin in Jianghu wanted to know everything about his target. Jin Libong paused, thinking about the man he hated. Meanwhile, Phantom waited patiently for the description. Jin Libong finally spoke, describing the man as handsome. He seemed to be lost in thought as he remembered him. He recalled that they first met by chance at a drinking party. The Grandmaster remembered his kind demeanor, charm, and wit, saying he was anything but ordinary. Jin Libong continued his story, explaining that the man knew everything and had been to every corner of the Central Plains, even though he was only 20 years old. The treasure merchant seemed impressed by the man's knowledge and experience. Jin Libong went on, saying that after 2 months of hanging out together, the man had shown him his martial arts while drunk. The Grandmaster seemed to be setting up a big reveal. The man stared intently at the damaged screen, his expression unreadable. The damage to the screen seemed significant, as if caused by a powerful force. The damage on the screen was none other than Naing Li Sang's special martial art, the Thunderbolt Sword. Jin Libong finally revealed who the man was. Jin Libong exclaimed that the Thunderbolt pattern was unmistakable. He added that those were traces of the Thunderbolt Sword, which he had only ever heard about. Jin Libong continued, explaining that Naing Li Sang was one of the 10 greatest martial masters of Jianghu. He had disappeared a few years back during the Big War between the Orthodox Alliance and the demonic cult. The Grandmaster added that he hadn't been seen since, even though the war ended 20 years ago. It was like he vanished from the face of the earth. Jin Libong admitted that he didn't believe it at first either, but his doubts disappeared when he saw the martial arts book the guy was holding. Turns out, he killed him and stole his secret technique. Jin Libong said that it was worth more than 1,000 gold coins. From the Sword of Life and Death to the 100 great masters of Jianghu, even Qian Muak, one of the 10 greatest masters, and known as the Demon Sword, went after him. This guy was a wanted man. Jin Libong continued his story, explaining that nobody he sent after the guy ever came back. Every time he tried, the guy would hunt him down instead. The guy even said he felt great as he walked away, like he deserved to take everything. Meanwhile, the woman listening seemed to find it amusing, smiling slightly. Phantom listened intently, thinking that Jin Libong probably wasn't lying since the guy tried to kill him, but he wondered how a 20-year-old could defeat Qian Muak, the Demon Sword. Jin Libong explained that the guy wanted a reason to take all his stuff. He wanted it to seem fair, somehow. Jin Libong looked directly at Phantom, begging him to kill that scumbag. Phantom thought to himself that Jiak Legion was the name of that demon. The assassin walked through the town, looking around. He was probably trying to find the guy. The assassin continued his search, his boots kicking up dust as he walked. He was determined to find Jiak Legion. The man pointed, explaining that this was the room young Master Jiak had been staying in. He seemed eager to please. The man went on to say that Jiak was quite considerate of lowly servants like them during his stay. He insisted that he was truly a warm person. Meanwhile, the assassin continued walking through the town. The results of investigating young Master Jiak revealed that he barely spent his money, but he was truly an elegant man, well-versed in romance. One woman even recalled the lullaby he sang, remembering him fondly. Some called him the elegant young Master Jiak, but someone else mentioned that he had cut off someone's fingers a few months ago. And to another rich guy, he was known as the one who took away all his assets. It seemed like there were many sides to this guy. Someone else said that he bet away all his life savings in the gambling hall. He was also called the fool who always loses money. It was hard to believe all these stories were about the same person. The last bit of information was about him competing in the Murim tournament. So, turns out, he has a lot of money. It was all adding up to something strange. The assassin clicked his tongue, clearly annoyed. He thought to himself, this slimy bastard, who exactly is he? He was determined to find out the truth. The assassin asked if Jacques Li Jian said anything before he left. He was curious about what was on the young master's mind. The other man replied that Jacques Li Jian had said that now that he was ready to start his grand life, he was going to go find a smart woman to take care of him well. He added that the young man was truly mysterious. The man then told the assassin that this was the room young Master Jacques used to stay in. He asked him to take his time looking around. The assassin stepped into the room. The assassin looked around, but nothing seemed different in particular. He was starting to think that this was a waste of time. The assassin kept searching the room, but then he noticed something odd. It was a scroll that said, "Conquer Hubei." The assassin read the words, trying to understand what it meant. Hubei. The assassin realized that 2 Murim tournaments would be held there this year. He was starting to understand what Jacques Li Jian was planning. The assassin laughed, thinking it was only a matter of time before he caught that scumbag. But he wondered why Jacques Li Jian would want to conquer Hubei, and not the whole world while he was at it. The assassin remembered that he had stopped him from doing that. He had advised him to take it one step at a time. He looked serious. Someone shouted, demanding to know who was there. The camera panned out to show the building. Someone was drinking tea and asked why Jacques Li Jian had gone to Hubei. He didn't know what was going on in that guy's head. Another person spoke up, saying they should get moving too. He added that they didn't have anything else to do anyway. Someone warned that if he stepped in, the entire Jianghu would be stirred up again. The tension in the room was thick. The man had a knife sticking out of his back, but he didn't seem to care. He said that he was already over 100 years old anyway. So what did the laws of the world even mean to someone like him? The old man offered a glass to the young one. He asked if he would like a drink. The guy with the knife in his back suddenly felt a strong energy. He looked around, trying to find the source. At the same time, the focus shifted to the brutal knife sticking out of his back, and then to 2 huge scythes. Turns out, this guy was said to be the former heavenly demon's most trusted ally. This was getting interesting. The panel showed the Supreme Demon Empress, Yang Huaryang. At the same time, Jin Libong was talking to the old woman. The focus shifted to the symbol on that sword sheath. It looked like a dragon. The man was sure that it was Nang Lisang, the Thunderbolt sword, who had gone into hiding. He wondered why the once great master would be with a demon. It was also mentioned that the terrifying demonic energy belonged to Cheon Muak, the demon sword. This was really getting out of hand. That Thunderbolt sword was Nang Lisang's special martial art, and even Demon Sword, Cheon Muak, went after him. So these guys were in cahoots with Jacques Li Jian. The man wondered why the group didn't kill him. The old woman casually held her cup as she spoke. She explained that they had destroyed the assassin's chi center and cut off a tendon in his leg. She added that she had heard assassins don't fear death. The group continued their discussion, unfazed by the dead assassin behind them. They mentioned that assassins are known to hide poisonous pills behind their teeth. It was a grim scene, but they seemed used to it. The injured man looked up, a twisted smile on his face. He realized they were telling him to kill himself, since he was in so much pain. He let out a weak laugh, accepting his fate. The old woman watched him, her expression unreadable. She thought to herself that there was. The injured man closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He knew there was no way out of this situation. He had accepted his fate. The injured man, covered in blood, looked up with a strange expression. He admitted that he was jealous of Jacques Li Jian. The man continued, saying that Jacques Li Jian was fortunate to be protected by masters like them. The group around the table listened without reacting. Suddenly, the group started laughing. Their amusement echoed in the room. One of them said that Jacques Li Jian was someone who didn't need their help whatsoever. The scene shifted to Jacques Li Jian. The young man stood with his back turned, ready to face whatever came next. The group ran through the field, finally finding who they were looking for. The leader shouted, asking if he had the book that recorded the secret technique. One of the men warned the others not to let their guard down. He explained that many masters had died trying to find this guy. The attacker held his sword tightly, ready to strike. He thought to himself that this little one was so fearless. The leader stepped forward, a menacing look on his face. He asked if the guy thought he could mess with the Treasure Merchant Alliance's Grandmaster and get away with it. The leader was sent flying through the air from a powerful blow. The rest of the group looked on in shock, calling out for their squad leader. The attackers came at him all at once, swinging their swords with fury. One of them shouted that he was a bastard, clearly not holding back any anger. They continued their assault, blades flashing. The attackers yelled to kill him, their intent clear as they pressed their attack. The swords found their mark, and the leader groaned in pain. He was struggling to defend himself against the overwhelming onslaught. The scene shifted to an overhead view, revealing a field littered with bodies. It was a brutal display of power, leaving leaving no doubt about the victor. Jok Lee Jian stood among the fallen, his expression cold. He remarked that it seemed he still hadn't given up yet, a hint of annoyance in his voice. Jok Lee Jian stared down at the fallen bodies, his expression dark. He wondered if just taking their fingers wasn't enough anymore. The guy looked like he was ready to unleash even more hell. Back then, anyone who used a sword risked death during the Great War between the Orthodox faction and the demonic cult. The fighting between the demons and the Orthodox was so intense that no one thought it would last for 13 years. The war was an endless hell filled with tears, wails, and bloodshed. However, the long war ended abruptly one day with an unexpected truce. Even 20 years later, the details of the truce remain a mystery. It's like both the heavenly demon cult and the Orthodox alliance agreed to keep quiet about it. As time passed, new forces began to emerge within the Jianghu. The world was changing, whether people liked it or not. On the other hand, some families had weakened because of the war. Not everyone was getting stronger. Some were falling behind. Someone was training with their sword, putting a lot of power into each swing. But why the hell couldn't they break through the 7-star realm? Zhang Charyan was getting frustrated. She couldn't understand why she couldn't break through to the next level. The second daughter of the righteous sword sect's leader knew that she had to master the Red Death sword art as soon as possible. She needed to restore her family. Strangely, her skills weren't improving, which made her look sad. The young woman was beginning to feel hopeless. Suddenly, someone called out. Charyan, Zhang Huaryan, greeted her sister. Her husband, Seo Beck, stood beside her with a smile. Zhang Charyan asked her sister and brother-in-law what brought them there during her training, but the sister interrupted, explaining that someone from the Zhangxin clan had arrived. Zhang Charyan looked completely surprised. She asked what was going on. Turns out, among the martial artists of the Central Plains, there were 2 tournaments that stood out as the most grand. One was the Heavenly Dragon Tournament, where spots, honor, and even lives were on the line. It was known as the greatest martial arts tournament under the heavens, and it was for young men and women who competed in pairs. Turns out, the Dragon and Phoenix Tournament is an event for young rising talents, and this year, both tournaments are being held in Wuhan, Hubei. Pairing up like children was already bad enough, she thought, but having to team up with that perverted scumbag, Zhang Inzhou, she looked completely defeated. There was no way she could do this, she thought. Zhang Charyan was furious. Why the hell did she have to get involved with someone like him? But her sister told her to stop arguing and listen to what she had to say first. Her sister explained that she always said she'd bring honor to their clan's name. If she got selected for the Dragon and Phoenix tournament, she'd gain great prestige. Zhang Charyan was not having it. She told them that she was absolutely not going to go against the Jiangxin clan. She suggested her sister lie about her age and enter instead. The sister's husband sighed. He thought his wife had a temper just like Zhang Charyan. He put his hand on her shoulder to comfort her. Meanwhile, in the market, people were selling new goods. They were advertising Westlake Longjing tea for less than half the price, trying to bring in more customers. Some people were gossiping about the Grandmaster. They said he lost another finger this time. It looked like someone punished him on their behalf, they thought. The person wondered what would happen if the Jiangxin clan held a grudge. What if they retaliated against their clan? Could they really do whatever they wanted just because they were a powerful clan? The guy was furious. He yelled that this wasn't what they agreed on, asking if they were insane and wanted to die. The whole scene was full of deceiving and hurting each other. The person wondered if his lordship could lend his strength for this matter. But the other one told him not to worry about that. He just needed to make sure he handled what they talked about last time. Schemes and dirty tricks were running rampant. Suddenly, the man realized his pouch was gone. He yelled at the thief, asking if he even knew who he was drawing his sword against. He wondered if this was the Jianghu he had longed and dreamed of. The woman looked shocked. She realized it was the leader of the Murim alliance. The crowd was in despair, mourning that the dream of unifying the demonic cult had ended without any success. They announced that the heavenly demon had fallen. The 13-year-long war was finally coming to an end. The leader stood with his sword as the crowd cheered, celebrating his victory. Zhang Charyan looked confused, saying that this was nonsense. She wondered why nothing had been revealed about how the Great War between the Orthodox faction and the demonic cult had ended, even though this was a play. Someone else agreed with her, saying that they had similar thoughts. He seemed just as puzzled as Zhang Charyan about the play. The first person pointed out that the heavenly demon's 9 calamities, demonic technique, was also called the invincible demon art. He added that in a one-on-one fight, no one could defeat him. Jok Lee Jian stated that the Great War between the Orthodox alliance and the demonic cult didn't end in such a simple way. He seemed to know more than he was letting on. Zhang Charyan looked at him, clearly confused. She wondered what was up with this strange guy. She couldn't figure out what he was trying to do. Jeok Lee-jin smiled innocently, asking if they could grab a drink together. He said he needed directions because it was his first time in Wuhan. He was putting on an act, but what was he planning? Jang Charyeon told him that if he was a martial artist, he shouldn't act like a worthless bum. She added that she had something else to take care of, so she was leaving. She was clearly annoyed by his behavior. Jang Charyeon walked away, deep in thought. She wondered if this Jang-hoo really had. Jang Charyeon turned around, asking what he meant by such great value. She seemed really confused by what he was saying. At the same time, a scene showed a crowd of people and a dead person. Ideals and chivalry had been abandoned long ago, he explained. This Jang-hoo was nothing but a fake show, he claimed. He then asked if that wasn't pathetic. Jang Charyeon's eyes widened as she listened to him. He gripped his sword tightly, telling himself not to get worked up. He was trying to stay calm, but it wasn't easy. Jang Charyeon stared at him, her expression unreadable. The young woman seemed to be thinking hard about what he had said. Jang Charyeon stared intently, telling him that he was still living in this Jang-hoo. She seemed to be trying to understand his point of view. She took a step forward, ready to continue the conversation. The young woman was determined to get her point across. Jang Charyeon declared that this Jang-hoo wasn't bad enough to deserve such disrespect. She seemed to be standing her ground, defending the world she knew. Jeok Lee-jin stared silently, his expression unreadable. The young man seemed to be considering her words, but it was hard to tell what he was really thinking. At the same time, crowds were gathering, excited about the upcoming tournament. One person pointed out a sword ornament made of nightlight stone, while another mentioned the cheap front row seats to the Heavenly Demon Tournament. The story moves to the Hwayang Inn. It looked like a pretty fancy place. Inside, the place was packed with people eating and drinking. The inn was buzzing with activity. A group of men were talking about the upcoming Dragon and Phoenix tournament. One of them said that swordsman Im of the Bukcheon family was sure to win. Someone else disagreed, saying not to underestimate swordsman Young of the Namak sect. He seemed pretty confident in his pick. Jang Charyeon walked through the crowded inn. She wondered if all these people were here because of the tournament. The innkeeper recognized Jang Charyeon right away and asked if she was the young lady from the Righteous Sword sect. She replied that she just wanted to have a light drink there, trying to keep things casual. The innkeeper acted like he was in a tough spot. He said that the only empty seats were in the special room, hinting that it was a more exclusive area. The innkeeper then asked her to follow him, adding that he would give Lady Jang a bit of a discount since she was Wuhan's best. Some customers were whispering about her beauty as she passed by. Jang Charyeon looked annoyed. She wondered who on earth was spreading such rumors about her, making her uncomfortable. Jang Charyeon said that she didn't normally visit inns alone. She then told the innkeeper that she would sit wherever she felt comfortable, trying to take control of the situation. Jeok Lee-jun noticed the people who were walking into the room. He thought to himself that they were from the Jangushin clan, the same folks from earlier. He was surprised, thinking, "Oh, we meet again." Jeok Lee-jun smiled slyly, leaning his head on his hand. He said that if he had known they would run into each other like this, he would have come with them. Jeok Lee-jun chuckled, looking at the two people standing behind him. He thought to himself that his luck was really strange today. He ripped apart a chicken leg with his bare hands. The young man then changed the topic, thinking about the upcoming tournament. Jeok Lee-jun was surrounded by a mountain of food, but he didn't slow down. He asked if anyone knew how to register as a participant and what the deadline was. Jang Charyeon looked at the guy with a raised eyebrow. She wondered if he had been starving all day. The young woman then asked if he was serious about participating in the tournament. Jeok Lee-jun replied, of course he was serious. He added that pretty girls would gather there in droves, right? He then said he had a face that girls tended to like quite a bit. The young man continued while stuffing his face. He claimed that he had been traveling since he was 10, and everywhere he had been, girls had always chased after him. Jang Charyeon looked at him, completely stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Moreover, she wondered if he had always been this kind of person. She thought the Great War between the Orthodox Alliance and the demonic cult didn't end in such a trivial manner. She realized that he was acting completely different from how he was earlier. Jang Charyeon listened intently as Jeok Lee-jun spoke. He suddenly declared that he knew who the most beautiful woman in the entire Jang-hoo was. Jeok Lee-jun grinned, making the unexpected declaration. He stated that it was his mother. He was clearly proud of his mom. Jang Charyeon's eyes widened in disbelief. She asked if he was disrespecting his mother, just because she was getting older. The young woman then wondered why she was so flustered and what she had done wrong. Jaok Lee-jin continued eating without a care in the world. He said that he was feeling nervous about a big event coming up, so it was making him crave more food. The young man then said that he was obviously going to win the tournament. Jang Charyeon looked at him, completely stunned. He declared that he was aiming to conquer Hubei this year. She was shocked and wondered if he was really going to conquer Hubei. Jaok Lee-jin was still eating, but he said that he had a lot to worry about and even more to do. He admitted that he gets really hungry at times like this. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, questioning his boasting. It seemed like someone thought he was being a bit too confident about winning the tournament and conquering Hubei. Someone walked in, saying that he thought he heard a voice while passing by. At the same time, Jang Charyeon looked up, surprised by the sudden appearance. It was Jang In-jol, the successor of the Jangshin clan. He said that it had been a while since they last saw each other, smiling slightly. A woman, identified as Jang In-hwa, Jang In-jol's younger sister, was also there. She suggested that they should have a drink there too. Looking at the others expectantly, Jang Charyeon wondered how Jang In-jol had been all this time. She thought that his habit of scanning her body was still as strong as ever, which made her uncomfortable. Jang Charyeon was so annoyed that she wanted to hit him right then, but she figured she should hold back. Anyway, she had other things to think about. Jang In-jol looked around the room, noticing someone else was there. He seemed surprised to see another person at the table. Suddenly, a coin flew through the air and struck the food on the table. The force of the impact scattered the food everywhere. The man standing there said that this was for the food. He seemed pretty serious about it. The woman looked down at the seated man and asked if he was done eating. She demanded that if he was, he should leave his seat immediately. The table was piled high with even more food. Someone was clearly giving it some thought. Jaok Lee-jin didn't seem impressed, saying that he didn't think it was enough. He noticed that more food was coming, but it still wasn't enough for him. The man told the other person to get lost while he was being nice. He looked pretty annoyed, like he was losing his patience. He smirked, revealing that he was acting arrogant because he was a member of the Janghu. At the same time, two massive swords rested on the table, looking pretty intimidating. The man commented that their weapons looked huge. He was standing there, looking down at the woman who was still eating. Suddenly, the man was stabbed in the back. He didn't even see it coming. He was completely shocked, staring at the blade in disbelief. What the hell was this blade? The man holding the sword was thinking about how heavy it was. He was telling himself that if he turned back now, he'd be humiliated worse than anything. He was ready to use his internal energy to lift the heavy sword. The man's grip tightened around the wrapped sword. He was determined to lift it, no matter what it took. The guy was really struggling to lift it. He was putting all his effort into lifting that thing. The wrapped sword seemed to weigh a ton. It looked like it was made of lead. Jaok Lee-jin laughed, saying it was quite heavy. He asked if he trained his muscles with the blade. The young man was clearly mocking the other person. One of the men was trying to play it cool, saying it was just for practice. He even forced a laugh, trying to make it sound convincing, but everyone could see he was nervous. The grip on the wrapped sword tightened. You could practically feel the tension in the air as the hands clenched harder. Jaok Lee-jin looked down at the wrapped sword with a grin. He stated flatly that it wasn't for training though. He seemed to be enjoying the other guy's discomfort. The other guy snapped back, calling him a bastard. He insisted that it was obviously a tool for training and that it belonged to him. He was getting really worked up. Jaok Lee-jin stared intensely. His eyes narrowed. He wondered out loud if the other guy was sure about that. He was clearly enjoying messing with him. Jaok Lee-jin was clearly getting impatient. He asked if they were trying to joke around with him right now. His hand glowed with power as he glared at them. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, telling him to stop it. The interruption hung in the air. One of the people in the group pointed out that they were at an inn. He was clearly trying to calm everyone down before things got out of hand. The room went silent, everyone watching with wide eyes. The tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Jaok Lee-jin just smirked, clearly enjoying the chaos. He seemed to be having fun messing with them. Young Master Jang looked at Jang Charyeon and asked if she was interested in him, looking at him with such a hot gaze. He seemed pretty confident that she would be. Young Master Jang kept going, mentioning that they would be joining the Dragon and Phoenix tournament together anyway. He thought it would be a good idea to get to know each other before that. Young Master Jang leaned closer, his smile widening. He was clearly trying to charm her and get her on his side. Suddenly, Jang Charyeon cut him off, saying that she had decided to participate with someone else. Her words hung in the air, silencing him. Young Master Zhang's eyes narrowed in anger. He was clearly not happy about being rejected like that, and immediately his hand clenched into a fist, his frustration growing. Zhang Charyan looked down at young Master Zhang with a cold stare, telling him that his behavior was a petty and shameful act. She didn't hold back at all, making sure he understood how she felt. Young Master Zhang was taken aback by her words and stammered, asking who she was planning to participate with. He was clearly caught off guard and a bit insecure. Suddenly, Zhak Legion stepped forward, declaring that he was going with her. He made it clear that he was the one she'd be partnering with, not anyone else. Zhak Legion crossed his arms, confirming that she would be with him. The young man looked serious, making sure everyone understood the situation. Young Master Zhang looked completely shocked, unable to process what he was hearing. He didn't expect someone to just step in like that and take what he thought was his. The woman in the yellow dress asked if he even knew who he was talking to. She seemed confident, like she expected him to be intimidated. Zhak Legion tilted his head up slightly, answering that he didn't know. He didn't seem impressed or worried at all. At the same time, the woman seemed to be looking down on him, saying that of course he wouldn't know. The woman continued her speech, explaining that people usually react in one of two ways when they face something they don't understand. She said they either ignore it or they're scared of it. Zhak Legion smirked, pointing out that she was doing both at the same time. He explained that she was ignoring him because she didn't know him, but also hoping he'd be scared of the other guy. The young man seemed amused by the contradiction. The woman put her hands on her hips, asking if he didn't think that was pretty contradictory. She looked like she was trying to keep her cool, but there was a hint of annoyance in her eyes. The woman smirked, saying that she wasn't sure about something. She looked like she was enjoying this conversation way too much. Zhak Legion was still eating, as he told them that he had insides. He said that he eats everything well, and people who eat well also speak well. The young man looked up suddenly, warning them to be careful not to spill the food. He seemed to be enjoying the tension in the room. He suddenly clenched his fist, crushing whatever he was holding. The warrior didn't seem to care about the mess he was making. Zhak Legion turned his head slightly, saying that he would see them at the Dragon and Phoenix tournament. The fighter's words hung in the air, a clear challenge to the others. Young Master Zhang's voice echoed through the room as he called out. The people inside turned to see who was speaking, and at the bottom of the frame, Charyan looked up with a serious expression. Young Master Zhang smiled slightly, clearly confident. He seemed to know something that the others didn't. Young Master Zhang told them that he would see them again. The young master's words sounded like a threat. Charyan and Zhak Legion stood silently at the table. The woman looked worried about something. Charyan looked up with a worried expression, thinking she was in big trouble. At the same time, the camera focused on the food left on the table, which looked like a mess. Zhang Charyan considered that Zhang Injeol's temper would get him in trouble. Zhak Legion then said that now that they were at this point, they should just participate in the tournament together, and he would revise his plans. He seemed serious about it. Zhang Charyan asked if he wasn't planning on participating in the first place. Zhak Legion confirmed that was exactly why he had to revise his plans. The young man looked confident in his decision. Zhang Charyan asked if he meant the Heavenly Dragon tournament. Zhak Legion confirmed, saying he didn't want to stay there being mad at her all the time. He seemed to be trying to lighten the mood. Zhang Charyan told him that she didn't fight little kids. She was clearly trying to tease him, but the woman's smile was a bit forced. Zhak Legion replied that at least those kids weren't the reason behind this Zhanghu's rot. The young man's gaze hardened, reflecting his deep-seated resentment towards the corrupt system. If someone said that with such a serious expression, it sounded like they were telling the truth. The woman looked at the explosion, her eyes wide with surprise. It seemed like Lady Zhang liked young Master Zhang a lot. The sky was blue and clear. She was obviously trying to make him jealous. It looked like she didn't plan on winning at all. To think she'd reject young Master Zhang and enter the tournament with that laughable guy, the townspeople gossiped. Laughable guy. The red-haired man looked confused. That blade earlier was certainly not one to be held that lightly. It's my first time seeing him. Who exactly is he? The man wondered. Young Master Zhang was furious that the arrogant girl dared to reject him. He swore he would make those two regret what had happened. As a result, 3 people walked away, seemingly unaware of his anger. Meanwhile, the righteous sword sect stood tall. It was a place of tradition and strength. People were already gossiping about Charyan rejecting young Master Zhang's offer. They couldn't believe she turned him down so quickly. Someone mentioned that young Master Zhang was causing trouble at the brothel because he was so upset. It seemed like the rejection really hit him hard. Ansui, the righteous sword sect's matriarch, was worried because the rumors about young Master Zhang weren't good. She looked concerned concerned about what might happen next. The men were worried about young Master Jiang and his temper. They didn't know what he would do next. At the same time, they were concerned about Charyan's youth and didn't want her to sacrifice herself for the family. Zhang Lichu, the righteous sword sect leader, admitted it wasn't just about the family. He feared that young Master Jiang might harm Charyan. He felt terrible that his wife and children were suffering because of his shortcomings. Ansu E lamented that if she had mastered the Crimson Death sword art, their sword family would have been more powerful. But someone else interrupted, saying there was no need to find Charyan. Someone declared that what they were saying was true, and immediately, Charyan appeared with Jok Legion, surprising the others. They looked relieved to see her. Someone looked at Legion and asked who he was. They seemed confused by his presence. Charyan told them she had decided to participate in the Dragon and Phoenix tournament with someone else. Down below, the men looked shocked and angry, wondering what was going on. Someone was walking towards them, getting closer with each step. At the same time, Jok Legion appeared, ready to greet everyone with a confident smile. Jok Legion introduced himself, saying it was nice to meet them. He looked relaxed and ready for whatever came next. Someone admired the vase, wondering if it was porcelain from the Fujian region. They seemed to be an expert on such things. The man holding the vase asked how much someone had paid for it. He heard the price was 150 nyang and said it was a pity. Jok Legion smiled, boasting that if he had been there, they would only have had to pay 120 nyang. He seemed proud of his bargaining skills. Someone mentioned that Charyan was going to enter the Dragon and Phoenix tournament with young Master Jok. The man seemed surprised by this decision. At the same time, someone else thought to themselves that no matter how childish she was, someone wondered how Charyan could enter the Dragon and Phoenix tournament with such a strange guy. But Charyan told them to stop it right there, looking annoyed. Zhang Charyan asked which sect young Master Jok belonged to. She looked genuinely curious. He replied that he didn't have one. The young man seemed calm as he held the vase. Jok Lijian added that his parents sold fruits near the human gate. He didn't seem ashamed of his family's business. The crowd looked absolutely shocked. They couldn't believe that someone who was selling fruits was competing in the tournament. They were clearly not impressed. Someone then asked about the sword and blade he was carrying on his back. They seemed confused by the contrast between his humble background and his weapons. Young Master Zhang asked if he had mastered both the arts of the sword and the blade. He added that it was something a third-rate thug would do. The guy looked down on him. Young Master Jok confirmed that he had mastered both. He seemed unfazed by the other guy's comment. He was confident in his skills. He then said that he was exceptional in several areas. The young man added that he came from a really strong bloodline. He looked proud of his heritage. Young Master Jiang asked if he had learned martial arts from his parents who sold fruits. He seemed surprised by the revelation. The guy looked like he was trying to insult him. Jok Legion confirmed that he did, but then he asked if they didn't eat. He didn't seem bothered by the question. The young warrior seemed to be making a point about the importance of food. The woman with long dark hair told someone to apologize to young Master Zhang first thing in the morning. She looked serious about it. The other person seemed nervous. The night was calm and quiet. Cherry blossoms were in full bloom under the moonlight. Zhang Cha Rian was walking through the garden at night. She mentioned that she brought him home in case Zhang Injol tried to do something to him. She seemed concerned about his safety. The lady was deep in thought. She wondered what she should do. She looked troubled. She looked up at the sky. The young woman seemed lost in her thoughts, trying to figure out the next step. The night was quiet, with cherry blossoms blooming everywhere. Jok Legion stood there, looking out at the scenery. Zhang Charyan asked if he couldn't sleep. Jok Legion replied that he couldn't sleep when he changed locations. He added that there was something he had to do that night. At the same time, his hand glowed with energy. Jok Legion, with a serious look on his face, mentioned that he was going to send a few guys packing today. He seemed determined about it. Zhang Cha Rian looked at him, clearly concerned. She wondered why he was making such a brutal joke with such a straight face. Zhang Cha Rian thought about what Jok Li Jian had said about his parents. She wondered if the fruit shop was just a joke. She then asked what kind of people his parents were. Zhang Cha Rian continued, saying she had heard his mother was beautiful. She wanted to know what his father was like. Jok Li Jian simply hummed in response, listening to her questions. Jok Li Jian explained that his father tried to take care of everything while following all the rules. The thing is, he also forced those rules on him, which was the problem. Jok Li Jin added that his parents were against him entering the Zhanghu. He mentioned that his father was especially against it. He looked a bit annoyed. Zhang Charian said that since his parents weren't part of the Zhanghu, they must be worried about their son. She added that they were probably worried about the Zhanghu itself. She said she understood that too. Zhang Charian mentioned that her parents were also worried about her. She added that since they were at this point, there was no going back. She looked a bit sad. The young man looked down, thinking about what she had said. At the same time, Zhang Charian also lowered her head, lost in her thoughts. Zhang Charian suddenly changed the subject, looking confused. She said that she thought she had already digested all her dinner because it only had vegetables, which was weird. Zhang Charian then asked if they would serve meat dishes tomorrow. Zhao Lijin looked at her, clearly surprised by the sudden question, and asked what she meant. Zhao Lijin told her to stop saying such foolish things. He then ordered her to leave the place after breakfast tomorrow, sounding serious. Zhao Lijin turned to Zhang Charian, asking what was wrong. She looked back at him with a surprised expression. Zhao Lijin smiled, saying that she was worried about him, which was nonsense. At the same time, Zhang Charian was shouting something. Zhao Lijin laughed, telling her that he was worried about the people she was going to meet in the future. Zhang Charian, clearly annoyed, started walking away. The building seemed to pulse with dark energy, giving off an evil vibe. It was like something terrible was brewing inside. Meanwhile, some people sat around a campfire, trying to relax. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows around them. Zhou Lijin looked down at the sword in his hands. He was thinking about that young guy, shaking with the sword, trying to get revenge for his father. How could he just pretend he didn't see that? Zhou Lijin looked up, his expression serious. He muttered that he had no choice but to send him to his father's side. He didn't seem to regret it at all. Meanwhile, the group still sat around the campfire, trying to relax. At the same time, Zhou Lijin smirked, saying that he guessed he just saved a poor kid from becoming an orphan. The guy clearly didn't care about what he had done. Suddenly, a man with a sword glared at Zhao Lijin, demanding to know who the scumbag was and why he was standing there like that. He asked if he even knew where he was. Down below, the group around the campfire looked up, surprised by the sudden outburst. Zhao Lijin didn't even turn around. He simply stated that it was the Dark Hub, a place known as the Wandering Market. He didn't seem threatened at all. The man with the staff looked down at Zhao Lijin, telling him that the world had become kind, since even little kids were roaming around there. He warned that if the words little kid came out of his mouth again, he was gonna die. Down below, Zhao Lijin's eyes flashed red, clearly not taking the threat lightly. The man smirked, looking to the side. He clearly didn't believe Zhao Lijin was a threat to him. Zhao Lijin said that he was going easy on the guy because he was a little kid. He didn't seem to be joking around anymore. He suddenly yelled that the man had no manners. He moved in a flash, attacking without warning. Zhao Lijin landed a solid hit, sending the man flying backward. The force of the blow was intense. Zhao Lijin's hand glowed with a dark purple energy as he struck the guy. The force of the blow sent the man stumbling backward, crashing to the ground. Meanwhile, 3 men sat around a campfire, watching the fight unfold. They seemed to be enjoying the show, judging by their relaxed postures. One of the men around the fire started laughing hysterically. He yelled that the idiot was getting beaten up by kids and should just give up and help with his mother's business. Back at the fight, Zhao Lijin gripped the handle of his sword tightly. The young man's tattoo was visible on his hand as he prepared to strike again. Zhao Lijin stood over the fallen man, looking down at him with cold eyes. He seemed completely unfazed by the earlier attack, ready to finish the job. The 3 men looked completely shocked by something. Their eyes widened, and they gripped their swords tightly, clearly not expecting whatever was about to happen. The woman declared that this was extremely important to her. She said it was the day she would take her first steps toward the future, so she had no choice but to steel her resolve. Meanwhile, back at the campfire, the men were still hanging out. They seemed to be listening intently, waiting to see what would happen next. The 3 attackers yelled, wondering what nonsense was going on. They charged forward with their swords raised, ready to strike. As a result of their attack, an explosion erupted. The force of the blast sent debris flying everywhere. The attacker continued his assault, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. He was clearly not holding back, showing no mercy to his opponents. Below, one of the men screamed, his face contorted in pain. He couldn't believe what was happening, realizing it was over for him. The woman's eyes narrowed with determination. She declared that she would have to kill today, even those she would usually let go. Her expression was cold and unwavering. A foot stepped onto a strange, glowing platform. The air was thick with the smell of blood, and the ground was littered with debris from the fight. The scene was eerily silent. The man looked down, his expression unreadable. He seemed lost in thought, perhaps reflecting on the brutal scene around him. There was blood everywhere. He stood in the middle of a room filled with dead bodies. The scene was one of utter devastation, a testament to the savagery that had just taken place. The air hung heavy with the stench of death. The tattooed hands reached out as as if searching for something. The intricate designs seemed to pulse with a dark energy, hinting at the power that resided within the man. He was ready for the next challenge. Meanwhile, in another room, a group of people sat around a table. They appeared to be deep in discussion, their faces etched with concern. The atmosphere was tense, as if they were planning something important. Joke Legion's eyes narrowed as he watched. He was clearly focused on something, his gaze intense and unwavering. Whatever it was, it had his full attention. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, a large man was being attended to by several women. They were fanning him and pouring him drinks, catering to his every need. He seemed to be enjoying the attention. Another man carefully poured a drink for the large figure. He did it with respect, clearly aware of the man's importance. The drink was probably expensive. Joke Legion walked towards the group. He moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the large man. The young man seemed ready to make a deal. Joke Legion smiled, taking in the scene. He thought it was a great atmosphere, and he seemed to be in his element. This was gonna be fun. Someone was carefully using a small knife. The hand, adorned with a ring, seemed to be preparing something with precision, and immediately after, the same hand opened wide, as if presenting the result of its work. The gluttonous emperor sat on his throne, surrounded by women who were attending to him. He looked comfortable and in charge, like he owned the place. The gluttonous emperor scowled, demanding to know who was making such a fuss about buying someone. He looked annoyed, his eyes narrowed in anger. The gluttonous emperor was introduced as the Dark Hub's leader, the most expensive person in the room. Meanwhile, Joke Legion stood with his back to the viewer, listening to the emperor's words. The gluttonous emperor laughed, questioning how a young girl dared to try and buy him. He seemed amused by the idea, but there was an edge to his tone. The gluttonous emperor looked down at Joke Legion, wondering if a young guy like him could even have that much money. He then asked how much he was even offering. The gluttonous emperor's face filled the panel as he stated the number, 500,000 nyang. Joke Legion presented the money, ready to seal the deal. He asked if they had an agreement. Someone watched from the shadows, surprised that Joke Legion actually had the money. The observer thought that there looked to be even more money in that bag. The gluttonous emperor considered raising the price, but he warned that he would be disappointed if he did. He seemed to be testing Joke Legion's resolve. The gluttonous emperor threatened to kill Joke Legion and take the money. He said that he would be even more disappointed. Then, Joke Legion held up a ring. The gluttonous emperor stood on the platform with his people. The tension in the air was thick as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Joke Legion was surrounded by women. He said that he would disappoint the gluttonous emperor a bit. He looked completely unbothered by the situation and found himself surrounded by women in a room filled with a strange red glow. He looked to be in a trance, completely unaware of what was going on around him. The atmosphere felt heavy and unreal. The women closed in around Joke Legion, their eyes glowing red in the dim light. He seemed lost in the illusion, his expression blank and unreadable. It was clear that he was caught in some kind of trap. A man with a sinister smile revealed that Joke Legion had been caught the moment he stepped into the room. He seemed to enjoy the situation he had put our hero in. It was clear that this was all part of his plan. The woman explained that it was the pinnacle of sorcery that paralyzed a man's reason. She seemed proud of the technique. It was a tool to manipulate the mind. The illusory blissful dance was in full effect, trapping Joke Legion in its grasp. The technique seemed to be designed to overwhelm the senses. He was completely lost in the illusion. Joke Legion blocked the punch with his hand, stopping the attack completely. The force of the impact sent sparks flying. Joke Legion casually remarked that it was a good dance. He looked completely unharmed, as if nothing had happened. He was clearly mocking her. Joke Legion added that it wasn't good enough to kill him, and immediately he unleashed a powerful strike with his sword. The attack shattered the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. Below, the women looked at each other, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. One of the women stammered, asking what was going on. She was clearly terrified that the sorcery had been undone. The tables had turned completely. The guy looked furious, realizing that Joke Legion had figured out their soul manipulation trick instantly. He couldn't believe the young man was that smart. The gluttonous emperor then asked if any of the women actually liked Joke Legion. He wanted to know if they were on his side or not. The women immediately denied it. Of course, they didn't like that guy. They were afraid of him. One of the women asked if they were dragged there by force and told them to leave. She assured them not to worry about what would happen after. She looked serious. The gluttonous emperor assumed that they were scared of leaving right in front of him. He knew they were trapped by fear. The woman told them to find the courage to leave so they could live well after this. She wanted them to think about their futures. Below, one of the women listened intently, her eyes wide. The gluttonous emperor watched them, his face unreadable. He was surrounded by the women, who looked nervous. The gluttonous emperor told them that was an impressive speech. He decided he would let them go. Below, the emperor smiled, but it didn't look sincere at all. But he added that it would only be after cutting off their limbs. The women looked shocked and scared by what he said. One of them covered her mouth in horror. Suddenly, a voice asked if he was serious. It was Juk Lee Jun, who seemed unfazed by the threat. He tilted his head, waiting for the emperor's next move. Juk Lee Jun looked down at the gluttonous emperor and told him he would slice him up alive then. He had a crazy look in his eyes, like he was really going to do it. The gluttonous emperor looked surprised by the threat. He clearly didn't think the young man would talk to him like that. The gluttonous emperor was getting angry now. He was wondering where this murderous intent was coming from. Juk Lee Jun thanked him, acting like he had just done him a favor. He was playing with the emperor's emotions. At the same time, the women thanked him for the money and said they would muster the courage to leave like he told them to. They wished each other good luck as they prepared to start new lives. Juk Lee Jun watched them go. The gluttonous emperor looked up, watching the women leave. He couldn't believe that this sleazy bastard's murderous intent had reduced him to just watching them run away. He was wondering what he had become. The gluttonous emperor looked at his hand, feeling awful. He was full of regret. The gluttonous emperor started charging up his power. He was getting ready to fight back. The gluttonous emperor shouted that he would kill Juk Lee Jun with his special martial art. He activated the gluttonous emperor's body protection art, saying that the young man would have to endure quite the beating to get even bigger. The gluttonous emperor's attack landed. The force of the blow sent shockwaves through the room. Juk Lee Jun stared down at the gluttonous emperor. The air was thick with tension as they sized each other up, both waiting for the other to make the first move. Suddenly, Juk Lee Jun unleashed a devastating energy attack on the gluttonous emperor. The force of the blast sent debris flying everywhere. The gluttonous emperor looked up at him, his face contorted in rage. He called the young man a rat bastard, completely infuriated by the attack. The gluttonous emperor shouted for him to keep running. He threatened to turn him into powder, filled with hatred for trash like him. Meanwhile, Juk Lee Jun was already moving in for another attack. Juk Lee Jun didn't hold back as he unleashed a brutal strike. The devastating blow connected, sending blood flying everywhere. The force of the energy attack ripped through the room, shattering everything in its path. As a result, the gluttonous emperor was left brutal and beaten, barely able to gasp out a painful groan. At the same time, a mysterious attacker was coming in for another strike. The gluttonous emperor was already struggling, barely able to defend himself from the onslaught. The attacker unleashed another blast of energy, screaming that the gluttonous emperor was a son of a jerk. The energy surged around him, ready to strike. Juk Lee Jun glared down at the gluttonous emperor, clearly disgusted. He demanded to know what the disgusting bastard had been doing, keeping those women hostage. The energy attack slammed into the gluttonous emperor with full force. He could only manage another painful as blood splattered everywhere from the devastating blow. The gluttonous emperor was in really bad shape, blood dripping down his face. He could only manage to utter a single, desperate word. The gluttonous emperor was sent flying through the air, surrounded by falling debris. At the same time, Juk Lee Jun stood there, calling the gluttonous emperor a bastard. Juk Lee Jun was surrounded by a crazy aura of energy. He thought that the gluttonous emperor was a real master. The gluttonous emperor looked up, bloodied but defiant. He was thinking that in that case, the gluttonous emperor was still falling, surrounded by destruction. He screamed, asking if Juk Lee Jun thought it would end just like that. The gluttonous emperor screamed in pain and rage, promising to kill his attacker. He looked absolutely furious, blood dripping from his face. The attacker cast a powerful blast of purple energy. At the same time, the gluttonous emperor was lying on the ground, seemingly defeated. The gluttonous emperor was hit by the full force of the blast. He was sent flying backwards, the impact shaking him to his core. The energy blast ripped through the forest, destroying everything in its path. Below, the gluttonous emperor lay motionless, covered in blood and debris. The gluttonous emperor was sent tumbling through the air, surrounded by rocks and dust. He was completely helpless, his body battered and broken. Juk Lee Jun stared down at the gluttonous emperor. He declared that he had paid for the emperor's life and was now taking him. The gluttonous emperor, covered in blood, asked where he was trying to take his dying self. He then said the young man was mistaken. Juk Lee Jun looked past the gluttonous emperor at someone else. He stated that he was talking to that person, not the emperor. The gluttonous emperor chuckled weakly. He wondered what that good-for-nothing could even do. The gluttonous emperor continued, saying that someone like the young man should be able to take him away without a sound. But Joke Lee Jin interrupted, explaining that he needed a reason to kill him. The gluttonous emperor chuckled, covered in blood. He admitted that the other guy was probably even worse than him. The emperor added that good people never fell into his traps anyway. The gluttonous emperor's eyes widened in disbelief. He couldn't believe someone like that could exist in this world. He was clearly shocked by what he was seeing. Jiaok Li Jin stood over the gluttonous emperor's body. The young man looked down at the scene with cold eyes, not showing any emotion at all. The warrior stood still, his back to someone. He seemed completely unfazed by the presence of whoever was behind him. Someone spoke from behind Jiaok Li Jin. He stated that they were finally meeting each other. The tone was calm, but there was also a hint of threat in the air. Someone called out to Manor Master Hua. The man looked exhausted, like he had been through a lot. Jiaok Li Jin asked if he should call him Hua Muchil so that he would answer. He had a slight smile on his face, like he was enjoying this. Hua Muchil's eyes narrowed slightly. He admitted that was right. Someone mentioned what a nostalgic name it was. Hua Muchil was the former patriarch of Mount Tai's Phantom Manor. Jiaok Li Jin continued, saying that it took him quite a long time to find him. Because of that, the young man seemed pleased with himself. Jiaok Li Jin wondered if it was really that hard to get over what happened. He was talking about the Phantom Manor incident. Hua Mucheol listened, his face showing a mix of pain and anger. Turns out, everyone in Jianghu knows that place was famous for having the best machining skills. Hua Mucheol, who had talent and a great family, was a man who had everything going for him. That was until his only daughter touched an unfinished mechanical device. It was a turning point for the family. The room was a mess, filled with blood and broken machines. A person screamed in the middle of it all, clearly traumatized by what they were seeing. Having lost his family in the accident, he blamed himself for being foolish. The scroll showed skeletons, a reminder of what he had lost. Down below, the gluttonous emperor was surrounded by his men. Hua Mucheol remembered how they changed his appearance and made him go into hiding. He wondered how he could ever forget such a thing. The scene was a gruesome reminder of the tragedy. Blood mixed with broken stones, telling a story of violence and loss. Jiaok Li Jin watched Hua Mucheol, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be analyzing the man in front of him. Hua Mucheol was a mess, tears streaming down his face. Jiaok Li Jin told him he was a good adult. Hua Mucheol continued, saying he was a good adult who had suffered for 10 years. He added that he would suffer all his life, unable to forget the sorrow of losing his family. Hua Mucheol thought it was strange that Jiaok Li Jin would risk his life to save someone he just met. He wondered what the swordsman would do with him after buying him. Jiaok Li Jin looked at the man and said he would use him to dominate the Jianghu. The young warrior's eyes seemed to pierce right through him. Jiaok Li Jin continued, stating his ambition was to dominate the Jianghu. He stared forward, a determined look on his face. Hua Mucheol stared at Jiaok Li Jin, a mix of fear and awe in his eyes. The room was silent, the tension thick in the air. Hua Mucheol started laughing, asking if this was, and immediately, the sound of a foot stomping echoed through the room. Hua Mucheol knelt on the ground, finally accepting his new fate. He greeted Jiaok Li Jin as his new master, bowing his head in respect. Hua Mucheol looked up, his eyes filled with a strange mix of determination and desperation. He pledged that he would devote the rest of his life to his master, Jiaok Li Jin. Jiaok Li Jin smirked, clearly pleased with the man's declaration. His eyes gleamed with amusement, enjoying the power he now held over Hua Mucheol. Jiaok Li Jin looked down at the kneeling man and asked if they should get started then. Hua Mucheol seemed confused, tilting his head slightly. Jiaok Li Jin didn't wait for an answer. He raised his hands, demonic flames erupting around him, ready to begin whatever twisted plan he had in mind. Hua Mucheol looked up, clearly stunned by what was happening. He stammered, unable to fully process the situation. At the same time, screams echoed through the night. Something terrible was happening. Someone was moving quickly, stepping carefully on a tree branch. A figure stood on a branch, watching the scene below. He seemed to be observing the chaos from a safe distance. The observer looked down, a hint of concern in his eyes. He wondered if the young master was still fighting. The man looked down at the ground, which was now covered in debris. He was clearly confused, wondering how in the world this could be happening. The observer looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He said that he had heard that a body once transformed by the supreme arts could never be reverted, so he couldn't understand how this was possible. Hua Mucheol sincerely thanked Jok Lijin. He said that he was going to use the other man until his bones wore out, so he was the one who was thankful. The young man had done it. Muyang announced that he was Jok Lijin's guard. He looked proud to be serving the young master. Meanwhile, the woman called out to Muyang. She seemed to be waiting for him to report back. The woman coldly told the man to shave his beard. She said that he looked old, and she clearly wasn't impressed with his appearance. Jok Lijin introduced Manor Master Hua to Muyang, his guard. The young master explained that Muyang would be guiding him about what he needed to do from now on. The woman announced that the plans had changed. She stated that they would begin with the Zhongshan clan, and she looked determined. The man looked up, clearly worried by the sudden change of plans. He had a bad feeling about this. The man questioned why she had changed the plans. He reminded her that she had said the likes of the Zhongshan clan weren't even worth messing with, and then asked about participating in the Dragon and Phoenix tournament. All of a sudden, one of the men stated that they never know when someone's mind will change. He added, "That's what a playboy would say," looking smug. The other guy replied that he saw that the first man was jealous of his popularity. He seemed amused by the other's comment. The first man scoffed, saying, "Of course not." He argued that just because someone has a lot of women chasing after them doesn't mean they have good fortune in love. He stated that it was merely indulgence, and true good fortune in love lies in marrying a good woman. The other man laughed, saying that he was truly extremely jealous, he could see. He seemed to be enjoying the other man's frustration. The scene shifted to a building with the name Zhongshan Clan written on it. It seemed like they were planning something big. The guards stood in front of the building, explaining that the union leader and young master were not there. They seemed to be waiting for someone important to arrive. The man and woman asked if they knew when the leaders would be back. They were clearly anxious to get an answer, but the guards didn't know. Another person chimed in, saying that young Master Zhang was causing trouble at the brothel because he was upset. He suggested they apologize before things got out of hand. The man sighed heavily, asking them to please tell the leaders, once they returned, that they had been there. He seemed defeated and worried about the situation. Suddenly, a voice called out, recognizing Grandmaster Zhang. Someone was approaching the group, ready to cause trouble. 8 flying hands, Quan. Yuki arrived, explaining that he was on his way because of the union leader's invitation. He added that he didn't expect to meet someone he'd be delighted to see, smiling widely. Grandmaster Quan replied that it had been a long time, looking down slightly. He mentioned that he had heard the Zhongyan clan's leader was showing off his power by inviting skilled individuals, but it seemed like he was selective about who he invited. Grandmaster Quan suggested that since they both had some free time, they should grab a drink, offering to pay. He smiled, asking if they should. Meanwhile, Jok Lijin watched the scene unfold from behind a window. A slight smile played on his lips as he observed the interaction. The group was at the Spring Breeze Inn. The inn looked peaceful and inviting under the bright sky. Someone poured a cup of the rare bear bile wine. He insisted that the other person take it, explaining that it was a very rare vintage. One of the men mentioned that he had the pleasure of tasting the precious wine, thanks to Grandmaster Quan. He seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to try such a rare drink. One of the men explained that the Zhongshan clan's leader was very upset. He asked if the Grandmaster would put in a good word for them if he got the chance. The woman chuckled, telling him not to worry too much. She promised that she would put in a good word for them. Someone at the table muttered that kids fighting was normal. He didn't seem too concerned about the conflict between the clans. Someone wondered where young Master Jok was. They seemed surprised that he wasn't around. The young miss got confirmation that he had left the night before. The servant explained that young Master Jok didn't even say goodbye. She thought back to how he had been whining about food. The young miss wondered why he would leave so suddenly. One of the men guessed that he was already far away from Wuhan. He figured Jok was long gone by now. One of the guys was saying how much fun they had and how he would pay next time. But suddenly, he stopped talking, looking shocked. The man suddenly realized something. He said that he had forgotten something important that he needed to take care of right away, looking anxious. He didn't waste any time. The guy announced he was leaving first and would see them next time. With that, he rushed out of the room. The woman handed over the bill to the man who remained. She did it with a smile, seemingly unbothered by the other guy's sudden departure. The man looked at the bill. He just chuckled, seemingly amused by the amount. The man's face turned pale as he looked at the bill again. He couldn't believe that a bottle of wine cost that much, and the side dishes were even more overpriced. He was clearly not happy about it. The man looked at the bill, sighing heavily. He said he didn't have much money right now and asked if he could come back tomorrow to pay. He looked pretty stressed about the whole situation. The woman just smiled back at him. She told him that they didn't accept credit at this establishment. She seemed pretty firm about it, but someone else spoke up, walking closer to the man. The attacker said that they couldn't overlook his circumstances. It was unclear what he meant by that. The group of men surrounded the man and a young girl. One of them said that until he brought the money, his daughter could stay there. The man looked shocked by this sudden turn of events. The man's face turned furious. He demanded to know if they were holding his daughter hostage. He looked like he was about to explode. The group of men stood there, and one of them said that the man could consider his daughter as collateral. He said that if the man didn't have the money, his daughter could entertain the guests too. The woman smiled evilly, clearly enjoying the man's predicament. The man's eyes narrowed as he realized something. He wondered if the woman was out of her mind, thinking this was just a normal wine house. Two men stood there silently. All of them had an unusual aura, which made the situation even more suspicious. The man's eye twitched slightly. Either they were as strong as him, or something else was going on. The man gripped his sword tightly. He realized that they had met again. Sect leader. He looked ready to fight. The group of people noticed someone approaching. One of them started to say young as they recognized the individual. The person recognized him right away. They called out, "Young Master Jok?" Jok Lee Jin was then asked what brought him there. He replied that he was just there to drink, of course. Someone spoke up, addressing a woman as Noonim. It seemed like they had something to say about the drink. Jok Lee Jin held up the bottle and said that the wine tasted a bit strange. He asked if she had mixed something in it. One of the people in the room questioned what was happening. He mentioned that big shots were known to come to this place. The woman looked annoyed by the accusation. She asked if they thought she was selling fake wine to everyone, even the important customers, before telling the person to quiet down. And immediately, someone started shouting that the bear bile wine they were selling was fake. He repeated the accusation for emphasis. The others in the room started to murmur amongst themselves, wondering what all the noise was about. They seemed confused by the sudden outburst. The woman tried to smooth things over, explaining that a drunk customer was causing trouble. She asked whoever she was talking to not to mind him, clearly trying to avoid a bigger scene. The challenger declared that he would show the proof to everyone there. He looked confident, ready to prove his point. The challenger turned to the woman, his eyes narrowed. He warned that if he could prove that the wine was fake, he would take everything this place had earned that day. The woman looked at him with a raised eyebrow. She asked what would happen if he failed to prove his claim. The challenger smirked, not backing down. He said that if he failed, she could brew liquor with his gallbladder, showing how confident he was. The challenger then turned to the crowd, raising his voice. He asked everyone to please come outside, ready to prove his point to the whole group. The men started discussing whether the place always had a backyard. One of them asked what proof the challenger even had to back up his claims. Jok Lee Jin stood there with his arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. He wondered aloud why people would take wine from this place if it was so hidden away, finding it strange. The iron lock and chains were heavy, clearly meant to keep something very important locked away. The chains were thick, showing how serious they were about security. The woman scoffed, saying they would never store their wine in such a place. At the same time, Jok Lee Jin broke the door with his bare hands, showing off his strength. The group reacted in surprise as the smell of alcohol wafted out from the broken door. They looked around, wondering what was inside that needed such heavy security. The man realized that Jok Lee Jin was about to reveal what the so-called precious wine really was. He knew he had to stop him before the guests saw the truth. He was clearly desperate to protect his secret. Now that things had gone this far, the attacker decided he had no choice but to take Jok Lee Jin out. He planned to kill him first, and then take away the wine while trying to use the chaos to his advantage. He looked determined and ruthless. Jok Lee Jin had a slight smile on his face as he looked up. He seemed to be enjoying the chaos that was unfolding. He was ready for whatever was coming. Jok Lee Jin easily deflected the incoming attack. He didn't even seem to break a sweat. The young man was clearly far more skilled than his attacker realized. The force of the deflection sent the attacker and several others flying. They crashed to the ground, covered in wine and looking completely stunned. It was a total disaster for them. The guests were in total shock, realizing what was happening. They were disgusted, shouting, "What's that? Why are there bugs in the wine?" The scene was absolute chaos. Then, the camera focused on the bowl itself. The wine was clearly contaminated with bugs, proving it was fake, and held out the bowl with a smile. He asked if anyone wanted to try it. The young man seemed to be enjoying the discomfort he was causing. One of the guests quickly declined. He said he was good, looking disgusted. The guy clearly wasn't gonna risk it. Another man wasn't so lucky. He took a sip and immediately started gagging. The taste was clearly awful. Jok Lee Jin looked around at the crowd. He asked how he could prove the wine was fake if no one was willing to try it. Our hero seemed genuinely annoyed that people weren't cooperating with his demonstration. Jok Lee Jin raised his hand, still holding the bowl. He asked again if anyone else wanted to try it. The young man's persistence was starting to feel like a threat. One of the guests shouted at Jok Lee Jin to stop. He said he had never heard heard of making bear bile wine with bugs. The guy looked absolutely disgusted by the idea. Joke Legion held up the insect. He explained that it was called a back-painted insect. The guy said it was called that because its back looked like a piece of art. Joke Legion continued to explain. He said the back-painted insect tasted almost exactly like bear bile, especially its excretion. The young man was clearly trying to gross everyone out. The crowd looked horrified. One of the men asked if he was serious about the excretion. The whole thing was just too much for them to handle. Someone spoke up, sounding suspicious. He asked Joke Legion how he knew that. The guy seemed to think our hero was hiding something. Joke Legion was about to say something. The woman behind him looked completely shocked, like she couldn't believe what was happening. Suddenly, a voice boomed out, introducing Elder Yang In-myung. He was the leader of the Southern Peak Alliance, and he looked like he meant business. After the 13-year-long Great Orthodox Demonic War, things changed a lot in the Jianghu. The doors of the 9 great sects and the 4 great families were sealed shut. The demonic cult began living in seclusion. Taking advantage of that void, 4 major forces established themselves as the strong players in the Jianghu. These included the Northern Heaven Supreme Family and the Southern Peak Alliance. Turns out, the Northern Heaven Supreme Family and the Southern Peak Alliance are the biggest forces around. It's kind of crazy how much power these groups have. At the same time, another group of people bowed respectfully. The scene felt like a formal gathering, everyone showing their respect. So, this seemingly ordinary old man is actually one of the most powerful people in the current Jianghu. It's hard to believe just by looking at him. Joke Legion held the bowl, looking calm despite the gravity of the situation. Everyone around him remained bowed, showing their respect to the powerful figure. The old man spoke, asking how the other person knew about the back-painting insects. He seemed suspicious, since those insects only live in the south. Joke Legion admitted he had wandered around a lot since he was young. He added that the old man's knowledge was vast and asked who he was. He introduced himself as Joke Legion, the eldest son of Drifting Clouds and Flowing Water. The name Drifting Clouds and Flowing Water hung in the air, clearly familiar to someone. Joke Legion clarified that he meant the best fruit merchants on the outskirts. He gave a small smile, clearly enjoying the moment. The 3 men stood together, their faces grim. The tension in the air was thick as they stared ahead, clearly not amused by the turn of events. The old man burst into laughter, finding the situation hilarious. He threw his head back, enjoying the joke immensely. The leader of the group mused if he was intentionally hiding his identity. He found it wonderful and impressive. The others around him listened carefully. One of the men chuckled, finding the situation amusing. He seemed to be enjoying whatever was happening. Manhwa wondered why the alliance leader would be interested in a kid like that. He found it pretty odd. One of the men said that he would give it a try. The other asked if he really would. The man took a bite, his eyes widening in surprise. He clearly wasn't expecting that flavor. The man looked absolutely furious, pointing the cup in the woman's face. He shouted that it was the same stuff they had before, clearly not happy about it. The others around them looked shocked, realizing they had been tricked. One of the men wondered if they had really just drank that stuff. The man who served the wine started begging them to calm down. He insisted that he was being framed and told them to bring the real thing or take his head. Some people watched from the side, too scared to get involved. One of them pointed out that they were the leaders of the Southern Alliance and the White Tiger Squad, so it was best to stay out of it. Joke Legion had a confident smirk on his face, enjoying the chaos. He thought to himself that they would all die if they messed with him. The man with the bill thanked Joke Legion, saying that they would have been in big trouble if it weren't for him. He looked genuinely grateful for the help he had received, and immediately, the group of people seemed to be discussing something about the tournament, mentioning that there were no empty rooms in Wuhan. Joke Legion simply replied, "Of course." He looked a bit confused, like he didn't really know how to respond to the gratitude. He probably wasn't used to people thanking him. Joke Legion declared that if it wasn't for him, who else would do something so awesome? He was clearly full of himself, enjoying the attention. The man seemed to agree, stammering that he was right. The young man said that from now on, he'd be looking forward to being treated as their savior. He had a confident smile on his face, expecting to be praised and rewarded. He was definitely enjoying this. Joke Legion asked if they should leave now, mentioning that he might have to inconvenience them for the time being. He explained that there were no empty rooms in Wuhan because of the tournament. He seemed to be hinting that he needed a place to stay. Yang In-myung commented that Joke Legion was an interesting guy. He seemed to be thinking about something. His eyes narrowed slightly. Manhwa was listening intently, waiting for him to continue. Yang In-myung corrected that Joke Legion was more than that. His expression was serious, as if he had realized something important. Manhwa tilted his head slightly, asking what he meant. Yang In-myung explained that from the moment he saw Joke Legion, feelings he had forgotten rushed back. He seemed to be lost in thought, his eyes unfocused. Manhwa was confused, asking what he was talking about. Yang In-myung continued that a combination of tremors, excitement, dispiritedness, and ambition were stirring up inside him. He compared it to the day the Southern Peak Alliance fell into his hands, a memory that clearly excited him. The leader of the Southern Peak Alliance seemed to be reliving a significant moment in his life. Yang In-myung admitted that he had no idea why he was feeling this way. He looked genuinely puzzled, his brow furrowed in concentration. The leader seemed to be struggling to understand his own emotions. Yang In-myung was thinking that the alliance leader was supposed to be able to see through anyone, but the leader was saying he didn't know. He seemed confused, his brow furrowed slightly. Manhwa wondered if that meant the guy was that special. He was trying to understand what the leader was getting at. The forest was quiet, the light filtering through the trees. The air felt tense, like something big was about to happen. Someone was sent flying through the air with incredible force. He was probably regretting something he did. The man knew he had to warn the others at all costs. He looked determined, his eyes filled with urgency. Someone was sent flying through the air. The fate of Jong-hoo depended on this, he thought. And immediately, the man with the sword realized he was being chased. What the hell? He is already caught up, he yelled, looking stressed. A man showed up, holding something in his hand. He stated that he was from the Orthodox Alliance. He looked serious, his eyes narrowed. The tag was clearly from the Orthodox Alliance. There was no mistaking it, he thought. It was the real deal. Myung of the Northern Heaven, Supreme Family, announced himself. He didn't have much time, so he said he would get straight to the point. He looked urgent, blood dripping from his face. Myung explained that they had to cancel the Dragons and Phoenix tournament and the Heavenly Dragon tournament. He said a group called the Flying Swallow Association was brewing a big conspiracy in this tournament. He looked worried, knowing the stakes were high. Myung questioned why they were trying to form an alliance instead of reporting to their superior, since this year's tournament was being held in the name of the Supreme Family. He realized that there was a spy among them that he couldn't trust. The man then yelled that they were being chased and that he would become the bait, so the others should get out and alert everyone about this. At the same time, the man he was talking to was hit hard. The man asked if this information had leaked anywhere. He assured the other that he was the first to know. He looked nervous, hoping this was true. The man smiled with relief. He looked like a completely different person now that he thought he was safe. The man's face changed again. He looked at something with wide eyes and asked what had just happened. He seemed confused. The attacker swung his sword, striking the man. The man's head flew off his body. It was a brutal end. The man, covered in blood, insisted that it wasn't the Flying Swallow Association who attacked him. He looked up, trying to understand what was happening. At the bottom, 2 butterflies flew around in the light. The scene shifted to a group of people standing amongst the trees. Butterflies fluttered around them, as one of them wondered what happened to the other guys. They looked around, a little nervous. The man with the ponytail reported that the 14th butterfly had taken care of them. He seemed confident and pleased with the news. The woman smiled, saying she knew he'd do well. She thought to herself that the Dragon and Phoenix tournament would become a nightmare. Below, the full moon shone brightly. The woman smiled, knowing that he would do well. She was confident that the Dragon and Phoenix tournament would become a nightmare. Jang Cha-ryun walked alongside Jeok Lee-jin through the forest. She looked forward to whatever was coming next. The girl seemed eager to see what he had planned. Jeok Lee-jin asked how tasty the meat that the sect leader was going to buy would be. He added that he liked meat. The young master wanted to make sure he got some good meat before leaving with Cha-ryun. Jang Cha-ryun asked if he was always hungry. Jeok Lee-jin admitted that he was, especially since he'd been thinking a lot lately. The young man seemed to have a lot on his mind. Jang Cha-ryun wondered if he was thinking about conquering Hubei. She seemed curious about what was going on in his head. The girl tilted her head slightly, waiting for an answer. Jeok Lee-jin asked what else he could be thinking about. He looked at her expectantly. The young man was clearly amused by her question. Jang Cha-ryun wondered if Jeok Lee-jin was lonely because he was alone in a foreign land. She stammered, trying to thank him. Down below, the two continued to walk side by side. Jang Cha-ryun thanked him for the day. She looked genuinely grateful for whatever had happened. The girl smiled softly, her eyes sparkling with appreciation. Jeok Lee-jin listened to Jang Cha-ryun. Jang In-jul had ordered Kwon Hyuki and that winehouse owner to do it. The young woman thought she'd ever consider entering the Dragon and Phoenix tournament with that kind of scumbag. Jeok Lee-jin told her that he was telling her to enter with him. He promised that he would bring her victory. The young man looked confident, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Jang Cha-ryun seemed a bit surprised. She tilted her head, looking at him curiously. The girl was clearly thinking about his offer. Zhang Chaoyan responded that it was fine with her. At the same time, Jok Li-jun smirked slightly, amused by the situation. Jok Li-jun declared that winning might be hard, but he wanted to put that Zhang In-gul scumbag in his place. He sounded absolutely determined to get revenge. Zhang Chaoyan said they should do their best. Jok Li-jun added that she didn't have to, but it was up to her. The young woman looked ready for whatever came next. Jok Li-jun paused, a glint in his eyes. He was clearly thinking about something else. Jok Li-jun supposed they had to take care of that scumbag first. He looked serious, knowing they couldn't ignore the immediate threat. The man smirked, asking if Jok Li-jun was the one who had upset Zhang In-jol. He seemed amused by the situation. At the same time, a guy reported to 2 others that the guy he planted at the inn told him some strange bastard had ruined everything. He sounded annoyed that his plans had been foiled. Jok Li-jun asked if it was their hobby to run background checks on the targets they were trying to kill. He looked confident, not at all intimidated by the threat. The attacker stammered, shocked that he was supposed to kill. He didn't seem prepared for the situation to escalate that quickly. While Zhang Chaoyan looked on with concern, the man clarified that Zhang In-jol only ordered him to kill Jok Li-jun. But he added that the young woman would be a problem too, smirking darkly at the thought. Zhang Chaoyan could feel the murderous intent directed at them. She realized that the guy was truly thinking about killing them all. She was scared. The man wondered if they would be able to beat the attacker if they joined forces. But he admitted to himself that he had never slashed someone in real life before. He was clearly out of his depth. Zhang Chaoyan asked if he had any experience in real combat. She was starting to doubt their chances of survival. She was worried about his lack of experience. The man begged someone to save him. He looked absolutely terrified. He clearly regretted getting involved in this mess. He was a master of palm techniques. When he used his skills, his hands seemed to multiply into 8, which earned him the nickname 8 Flying Hands. He looked pretty intimidating. He was once a hero who dreamed of a better Jianghu. He was fighting to protect people, but it turned out that only the villains always seemed to thrive. He realized that the distinction between good and evil was meaningless. It was all just a game. And then he himself became a villain. He had seen too much to stay on the side of the good guys. Zhang Chaoyan was worried. She thought to herself that she had to face such a guy alone. She looked pretty scared. Jok Li-jun looked at his opponent. He realized the difference in skill and experience between them was huge. He looked a little nervous. Zhang Chaoyan told him to draw his sword now. She looked determined, ready to fight. She wasn't going to let him back down. Jok Li-jun agreed. He grabbed the hilt of his sword. He was ready to fight now. Zhang Chaoyan declared that she couldn't just stand there and let this happen. She gripped her sword tightly. She looked determined to protect him. The 2 of them stood together, facing Kwan Hyuki. The tension in the air was thick. It was about to be a fight. Kwan Hyuki smirked, telling his opponent that he seemed eager to die first. He raised his hand, ready to attack, and immediately, the ground exploded from the force of his attack. Rocks and dust flew everywhere. Kwan Hyuki unleashed his palm technique. When he uses his skills, his hands seem to multiply, like he has 8 flying hands. Jiang Cha Ryaeon was shocked by his speed. She realized she needed to use her movement technique too. At the same time, Kwan Hyuki's leg moved with incredible speed. Jiang Cha Ryan barely managed to block the attack. She gritted her teeth, struggling to hold her ground. The force of the blow was immense. Kwan Hyuki's palm technique intensified. The air around him crackled with energy as he prepared to strike. The force of Kwan Hyuki's attack slammed into Zhang Chaoyan, sending her flying backwards. She was barely able to block it. Zhang Chaoyan was terrified as she fell. She thought to herself that this was completely different from when she practiced. Zhang Chaoyan was about to give up, but Jok Li-jun spoke up. He told her not to rely on her movement technique and to let her body follow the flow of the sword. Jok Li-jun continued giving her advice. He told her that her feet don't move the sword. The sword moves first, and then her feet follow. Jok Li-jun told her to focus solely on the sword. He wanted her to stop thinking about anything else. Kwan Hyuki laughed, calling him a talker who was hiding in the back. The guy seemed to be really enjoying himself. Zhang Chaoyan and Kwan Hyuki clashed swords. She was clearly struggling to keep up with his attacks. Zhang Chaoyan realized that if she got pushed back, they would both die. She was terrified of the thought. Kwan Hyuki unleashed a powerful attack. He seemed confident that he could win this easily, calling it ridiculous. Kwon Hyuki launched his palm attack. He declared that those childish tricks wouldn't work on him, and immediately, Jeong Cha Ryan was sent flying backwards from the force of the blow. Jeong Cha Ryan was in a bad spot. She thought to herself that she really couldn't handle this. The young woman wondered what she should do. Jeong Cha Ryan noticed something was off. She asked Kwon Hyuki what was going on, looking at him suspiciously. Kwon Hyuki pointed out that her sword technique was normally quite heavy. He asked why she was moving so daintily. Jeong Cha Ryan seemed to realize something. She wondered if it was the Crimson Death Sword art. The Crimson Death Sword art features a variety of changes in footwork and irregular swordplay. Turns out, it's based on agile movement. Kwon Hyuki looked down at Jeong Cha Ryan, who was lying on the ground. He wondered if she was saying that the method she'd trained in for over 10 years was wrong. Moreover, he questioned what this guy knew about the Crimson Death Sword art. And immediately, Jeong Cha Ryan thought to herself that he was asking for his life. Jeong Cha Ryan had been feeling like she'd been wearing clothes that didn't fit her for a long time now. Ever since she reached the 7-star realm, it felt like she was being blocked by a wall. She wondered if it could really be what he was saying. The young woman questioned if the Crimson Death Sword art was really fast as an arrow, yet slow like a turtle, and as fluid as water. Jeong Cha Ryan realized that at this rate, death was the only option. Even so, she decided to give it a try. She steeled herself, ready to change her approach. Jeong Cha Ryan focused, holding her sword tightly. She thought about the words she'd heard, heavy and soft. The wind howled around them, carrying the weight of the impending clash. Kwon Hyuki stood there with a smile. At the same time, you could see where the manhwa is published. Jeong Cha Ryan steeled her resolve. She knew that this was it. Kwon Hyuki was getting angry. He shouted at her. Kwon Hyuki yelled that she was an arrogant brat, and immediately, he unleashed his attack. Jeong Cha Ryan barely managed to raise her sword to defend herself. The two fighters collided with incredible force, energy exploding outwards. The impact sent shockwaves through the surrounding forest. Jeong Cha Ryan was hit hard, blood trickling down her face. She could barely stand after that attack. Kwon Hyuki looked absolutely furious. He yelled that he would put an end to everything. Kwon Hyuki paused, looking around with a surprised expression. The man was clearly confused. Kwon Hyuki was left standing alone in the forest. He wondered where the girl had gone. Kwon Hyuki looked up, realizing that this was it. He steeled himself, preparing for the final move. At the same time, Jian Lijin was high in the air, ready to strike. The young man was moving with incredible speed, aiming right at Kwon Hyuki. Kwon Hyuki looked up in shock, wondering what he was seeing. He stammered, questioning if that was the void steps technique. The young warrior landed gracefully, his feet barely touching the ground. His movements were so light, it was almost like he was floating. Someone realized that it was the falling blossom step of the heavenly thunder steps. The person sounded surprised, recognizing the technique. Kwon Hyuki admitted that he probably didn't know much about the other man's father's martial arts, since they were rarely ever revealed. He then asked about whose father's martial arts he was referring to. The sound of footsteps echoed through the forest. The steps were slow and deliberate, creating a tense atmosphere. Jian Lijin mentioned that his father and mother said they fell in love at first sight. He admitted that, honestly, he never believed in those kinds of things. The young man continued, saying that although he thinks he understands a bit now, he smiled softly, a rare and genuine expression on his face. Kwon Hyuki wondered if the code for his movements had been distinguished. He questioned if Ki Awakening could be a martial art. At the same time, Jian Lijin was being attacked, his body flying through the air. The force of the attack sent the man flying through the air. He was completely helpless, unable to stop himself from crashing. The man lay on the ground, blood trickling from his head. He couldn't believe what had just happened, muttering that there was no way that guy could be this strong. The attacker stood tall in the forest, his gaze fixed on the defeated man. He realized that the guy was on a level that he couldn't even comprehend. The man on the ground stammered, pleading with the attacker to let him live. He was terrified and desperate to escape the situation. The sound of footsteps echoed as the attacker approached. He asked if the man knew why he hated his father so much. The man on the ground was still talking, saying that if it were his father, he would definitely tell him to forgive him. He added that his father was a really frustrating person. The man on the ground was in disbelief, asking if he was insane and what kind of nonsense this was. He looked like he was about to pass out. The man on the ground was still trying to convince him, begging him to run away first. But he remembered what his mother said. He thought to himself that they would never live like that. His eyes glowed red with determination. Even if his father's path was the right way, he would live by his mother's path. He suddenly heard a sound, wondering what it was. The man on the ground down looked up, bloodied and beaten. He muttered that it sounded like ghosts wailing, clearly confused by what was happening around him. The hellblade glowed with a menacing red light. Dark energy swirled around the blade, hungry for more blood. Zhao Li Jin swung his sword with incredible speed. The red energy left a trail of destruction in its wake. The force of the blow sent the man flying through the air. He was completely helpless against the overwhelming power. The man's face was covered in blood and dirt as he looked up in shock. He asked what this was, clearly not understanding how he had been defeated so easily. The world spun as his vision blurred. He could barely keep his eyes open, each blink sending a fresh wave of pain through his head. Blood rained down as bodies fell from above. The scene was one of complete savagery, with no escape from the carnage. Zhao Li Jin grinned, his face splattered with blood. He thought his father's path was just too boring, and he was going to do things his own way. On a windswept cliff, a lonely figure stood singing. The lyrics spoke of paths and destinies, echoing in the empty air. The song continued, but no one was around to hear it. Only the wind carried the melody away, but a flower on the rocks lent an ear, or so the song claimed. The two figures stood close together, almost as if sharing a secret. Zhang Charian asked if he was awake. Her voice was soft, filled with concern. Zhang Charian struggled to carry Zhao Li Jin. He told her to put him down and keep going, insisting that she was hurt. The scene shifts to a quiet pond. Someone was talking about what happened, saying that the guy had no luck at all. Apparently, the speaker finished the guy off after he fell. Zhang Charian, looking shocked, asked if he stabbed the person and if they were dead. She seemed really disturbed by the news. Zhao Li Jin, with a sinister smile, wondered if the guy was a Jiangshi. He couldn't believe the person was still alive, even with a stab wound to the heart. Zhang Charian looked absolutely horrified. She said that the person was dead and that she was half responsible for it. Zhao Li Jin reached out and put his hand on Zhang Charian's shoulder, trying to comfort her. She was still trembling from what had happened. Zhao Li Jin told her there was no need to make a fuss, because the guy deserved to die. Besides, he added, the young man continued, saying that drawing a sword without the will to use it was an insult to the sword. He looked completely serious. Zhang Charian thought to herself that he was really such a mysterious man. He might seem like a senseless guy, but he also seemed like a different person sometimes. She was clearly confused by his behavior. Zhao Li Jin kept walking and said that it was the beginning now. He seemed excited about what was to come. The warrior repeated himself, saying that it was the beginning. He had a crazy smile on his face as he looked forward. Zhao Li Jin was thinking about the Dragon and Phoenix tournament, the Murim's grand tournament, and conquering the world. He felt like it was the beginning of something big. Meanwhile, a horse carriage was making its way through the forest. The people inside looked like they were on a very important mission. At the same time, inside the carriage, there were some bandaged weapons. Below them was a sword with a dragon design, shining brightly. Two older men were talking, with a red background behind them. The man on the right asked if they had bought it. The man in sunglasses answered that they had. He seemed pretty confident. The man held up a basket filled with dumplings, announcing that they had arrived. He looked proud of the food he was carrying. He then took one of the dumplings and bit into it. He seemed to be enjoying it a lot. The man said they would arrive at Wuhan soon. He added that traveling slowly like this was a pleasant experience, bringing back memories of the good old days. The guy asked if the other knew what his friend had said when they first met years ago. The other man looked annoyed, telling him not to bring that up again. He remembered that as soon as the guy saw him, he drew his sword and lowered his voice dramatically. He recalled the man saying that he didn't care about the Supreme Demon Empress's past misdeeds, but he would not allow her to step on the young master's shadow. In the distance, two figures faced off with swords drawn, ready to fight. One of them declared that the other would die right there. Meanwhile, an old woman listened with a smile, seemingly amused by the situation. The old woman was sitting with two other men. One of them said that it was a time when he was senseless. He laughed, finding humor in his past self. One of the men looked serious as he asked who they meant by young master. He seemed to be seeking clarification on who they were talking about. The old woman clarified that she was talking about Legion's father. She smiled knowingly, as if she knew more than she was letting on. The man chuckled, saying he couldn't believe Legion was already participating in the Dragon Phoenix tournament. He remarked how quickly time seemed to be passing. The old man chuckled, saying that a lot of young kids were gonna get hurt. He seemed to enjoy the thought, smiling with a knowing look. Someone else replied that Legion doesn't mess with kids, but immediately Suddenly, Legion's face appeared, adding that it's only unless they deserve a beating. One of the men asked if that scumbag was still alive. The other one confirmed that Legion came out from the righteous sword sect with young Lady Zhang. The first man yelled, wondering what Keikash-1 Hayuki was doing that he couldn't take care of one guy. He was clearly furious, his face contorted with rage. The other man then added that Great Warrior Quan hasn't returned since leaving the night before. The first man asked what was going on. He wondered if that scumbag was fine, while Kao Chuan Hyuki had disappeared. Zhang Cha Rian stood over the fallen man with her sword drawn, starting to understand what was happening. She muttered, thinking it couldn't be possible. Below her, the man lay motionless in a pool of blood. In another room, a man with a stern expression let out a short laugh. He seemed surprised by what he was hearing. The man burst out laughing, finding the situation absurd. He said he must have been crazy to even think about it. The man added that he didn't know how Legion survived, but he declared that they would find out if it was luck or skill in the Dragon Phoenix tournament. The sky was clear and bright, but down below, flames were burning intensely. The fire blazed, consuming everything in its path. Fireworks exploded in the sky, lighting up the area. The bright flashes and loud bangs echoed all around. Banners for the Dragon Phoenix tournament flew high, advertising the event. The flags of the Northern Heaven Supreme family waved proudly alongside them. A line of guards stood at attention, holding their spears ready. Their faces were serious, and they looked like they were ready for anything. People gathered in front of a large, ornate building. The area was bustling with activity, and everyone seemed excited. The dragons and phoenixes were arriving, and the crowd started to point out the famous martial artists. Someone mentioned young Master Nam of the Northern Sword Sect and young Miss Huang of the Huang family. Meanwhile, someone started screaming in terror. He looked absolutely horrified by what he was seeing. The crowd went wild, shouting that it was young Master Im of the Northern Heaven Supreme family. Someone even added that Hagi, the successor, was better looking than they had heard. He seemed to enjoy the attention. Someone else pointed out that young Lady Sima of the renowned Sima clan was with him. People wondered if the four renowned great clans were finally starting to make their moves. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. Two people gasped, staring at someone in disbelief. One of them pointed, stammering that it was that man. They looked like they had seen a ghost. The crowd then noticed young Master Yang, shouting that he was the one who would win the Dragon Phoenix tournament. They also pointed out that the person with him was young Miss Soul, the greatest beauty of Chonghong. The crowd was clearly impressed. Someone in the crowd declared that they would root for him. The hand looked confident, ready to take on any challenge. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The man with long hair thanked everyone for rooting for them. He looked genuinely happy to have the support. The crowd cheered, confident that they would win, but someone whispered, wondering who the man was. They clearly didn't recognize him. A guy yelled at him to get lost and stop getting in the way of young Miss Seal. Someone else in the crowd wondered how he wasn't even nervous. They were jealous of his calm attitude. Jiok Legion remarked that they had decorated the place nicely. He added that those Northern Heaven Supreme family brats must be making a lot of money. Someone simply said his name, Legion. They seemed surprised by his presence. Zhang Charyan looked at Jiok Legion and told him to try their best together. She seemed determined to do well in the upcoming tournament. Jiok Legion simply replied that he would. He smirked, looking confident and ready for whatever was coming. Someone announced that the 8 Dragon Phoenix teams should enter. Zhang Charyan told Jiok Legion that they were being called and that they should go. A man told the group not to touch anything and just wait. He seemed strict and serious about the rules. Jiok Legion remarked that the man was talking as if he wanted them to touch something. He seemed amused by the situation. The room was filled with nervous energy, and someone wondered aloud if it was nerve-wracking. He also wondered how many people would make it to the second gate. The tension was definitely building as everyone waited to see what was next. 2 women looked up, and one of them asked what they were even doing there. She seemed confused and unsure about what was going to happen next. It was all so mysterious. One of the women wondered if they were going to have to duel right from the start. She looked worried, clearly hoping that wasn't the case. It would be intense if that's what they had to do. A man with long hair looked up, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be thinking hard about something, maybe strategizing. It was hard to tell what he was planning. 2 women stared at a sign that read, "Match starts upon entry." Suddenly, someone snapped at one of them, demanding to know what she was looking at. She seemed a little startled by the sudden confrontation. A sign declared that the match starts upon entry. Someone wondered if that meant the tournament would start the moment they walked in. He seemed a little worried about what that might mean. Legion looked up, a smile playing on his lips. He seemed to be thinking something over, but it was hard to tell what he was planning. He just said, "I see." 2 figures stood before a large drawing. One of them asked if the other felt something strange about the drawing. It seemed like they were trying to figure out what it meant. Suddenly, someone exclaimed that they got it. It seemed like they had a breakthrough, figuring out something important. The person pointed out that there were 18 figures in the drawing, each holding one of the 18 traditional weapons of Chinese martial arts. She paused dramatically, about to reveal what that meant. Legion declared that it all meant nothing. He explained that it was just a trap to draw attention to the 18 traditional weapons of Chinese martial arts. The other person stammered, confused, asking if it was a trap. The other person asked if that meant there was another hidden secret. He urged the other to take a closer look again. He insisted there was nothing in particular other than that. Suddenly, the other person's eyes widened in shock. She seemed to have realized something important. Her expression a mix of surprise and fear. Someone exclaimed that the people in the painting seemed to be fighting each other, but they noticed that everyone in the painting was looking at one thing in particular. As a result, the focus shifted to the incense burner. It was glowing with an intense light, drawing everyone's attention. The group worried that they had been told not to touch anything. They wondered if they would be disqualified if they did. Someone warned them that the examiners were watching closely. They cautioned everyone to be careful not to touch anything, even by mistake. Ignoring the warning, someone reached out and touched the incense burner. The person looked shocked, as if they immediately regretted their decision. The group looked around the room, taking in their surroundings. They were all still a bit on edge after the incident with the incense burner. The group got closer to the pot, trying to figure out what it was. They were clearly curious, but also cautious after the warning they received. Jiak Li Jian held up the pot, examining it closely. He noticed some writing on it. Jiak Li Jian announced that the pot said, Dragon and Phoenix Hall. Zhang Cha Rian looked at him, asking what that meant. Jiak Li Jian explained that the match was supposed to start upon entry, meaning the first stage had already begun. He looked around, sensing that something was about to happen. Jiak Li Jian was about to say something about arriving at the place, but he stopped. At the same time, someone yelled at them to wait. The authority figure walked up to Jiak Li Jian and Zhang Cha Rian. He yelled at the two of them. The authority figure scolded them, asking if they didn't hear that they weren't supposed to touch anything. He said that they couldn't tolerate their careless behavior. Jiak Li Jian listened to him with a cold expression. The authority figure continued, asking if they didn't think that kind of act could harm everyone. He seemed really mad. The authority figure demanded that they put it down at once. His eyes narrowed with anger. Zhang Cha Rian stared back at him, not saying a word. Jiak Li Jian remarked that something was gravely wrong with them. He questioned why someone so young would only live by the rules. Zhang Cha Rian looked at him, thinking he looked like he was their age. Jiak Li Jian continued, saying that kids should reject and rebel against the existing order. He looked like he was trying to convince someone, but another person fired back that was just an excuse for immature kids. He looked really angry. The man's eye narrowed. He seemed determined. Meanwhile, two men stood side by side, observing everything. They looked like they were waiting for something to happen. The man thought to himself that the timing was perfect. It would be a good idea to subdue this scumbag and leave a strong impression on everyone, he figured. The man argued that they were only told not to touch any item, but there was no rule against taking out his sword. He didn't see any other way if words didn't work, but the woman yelled at him, telling him that he shouldn't do it. The man said not to worry. He was just going to give him a scolding. He looked determined as he drew his sword. The man's eyes widened in disbelief. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The man smiled, looking confident. He thought that the other guy was a scumbag. The man thought to himself, how is he so strong? His grip tightened on the sword, knuckles turning white. Jiak Li Jian stared down at the man with a cruel smirk. He told him not to humiliate himself and to just listen to his little sister. The man strained against whatever was holding him, but it was no use. He realized that he couldn't move at all. The commotion didn't go unnoticed. Other people in the room started to notice what was going on and asked if there was a fight. Li Jian's grip on the sword remained firm, his expression unreadable. The young man wasn't even breaking a sweat. The young boy looked up at Li Jian, telling him that he did well holding back. He seemed grateful that the fight hadn't escalated further. The boy's brother interrupted, lecturing that you mustn't point your sword recklessly at the powerless. The young boy looked up, confused, and asked, "The powerless?" The man then apologized for their rudeness. He bowed his head slightly, showing his respect. At the top, the man smiled faintly. Meanwhile, someone's hand reached out and touched the incense burner. Jiak Li Jian then told everyone it was time to go. The young man gestured towards the exit, ready to move on. Zhang Cha Rian looked shocked and asked what was going on. She seemed confused by the sudden turn of events. An announcement boomed out, warning that anyone leaving without permission would be eliminated. Everyone turned to see who was foolish enough to break the rules. One of the guys looked surprised and asked what was up with that guy. He wondered why someone would just leave on their own. Jiak Li Jian stopped and told someone that they might be pathetic, but he'd give them a chance because of their little sister. He seemed to have a soft spot for the younger sibling. Li Jian then told them to follow him if they wanted to advance to the second gate. He pointed in the direction they needed to go. A couple looked up, clearly worried. They had heard that anyone who left without permission would be kicked out. Below, a man looked furious, hearing about someone breaking the rules. Joke Li Jian just chuckled to himself, ignoring the warning. He seemed to be enjoying the chaos he was causing. The crowd watched him go, whispering about the lunatic. They couldn't believe someone would risk elimination so casually. Ahead, the Dragon and Phoenix Hall loomed. It was a massive building, promising challenges ahead. Zhang Charian looked surprised and said that the Dragon and Phoenix Hall actually existed. Jiok Li Jian smirked, already planning his next move. Someone knocked on the door, and at the same time wondered how many people had made it this far. It seemed like a really difficult problem to solve. Zhang Charian looked at Joke Li Jian, clearly surprised that they weren't alone. She asked if it was possible that it was just the two of them who had cleared the puzzle. Inside, a huge crowd of people stood around, waiting to see who else would arrive. They all looked like they were ready to fight. Zhang Charian looked completely shocked, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe that so many people had actually solved the puzzle. Jock Li Jian stood calmly, looking around at the competition. He didn't seem worried at all, even with so many strong fighters around. The crowd stood around, looking at each other suspiciously. The tension in the room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Everyone seemed to be sizing up the competition. Joke Li Jian spoke sarcastically about the prestigious Orthodox factions. He wondered if they had been called together for nothing. Zhang Charian looked at him, trying to understand what he meant. Zhang Charian's eyes widened in surprise. She asked if he was saying that there was corruption going on. She seemed genuinely shocked by the idea. Joke Li Jian explained that they must have only given the information to the prestigious clans. He added that he could tell just by the face that some idiot was already here before them. He smirked as he said this. The crowd murmured, wondering who he was calling an idiot. Everyone started looking around at each other, suspiciously. The tension in the room just kept building. Someone in the crowd was furious. They were calling someone a bastard, and it was clear they were not happy. Zhang Charian looked shocked. She couldn't believe he was walking around so confidently after everything that had happened. Jiok Li Jian narrowed his eyes. He wondered if she knew something, judging by the way she was staring at him. Someone else was thinking about Quan Hyuki. They wondered what could have happened between him and the girl. The guy was getting frustrated. He had told Quan Hyuki to get rid of someone, and he was wondering what the hell was going on. Someone realized that something was wrong, and immediately, another person wondered if someone was backing him up, or if Quan Hyuki had taken the money and run. The two of them were talking. The woman looked at the man with a smile on her face. Joke Li Jian was smiling, with his arms crossed. He seemed to be enjoying the conversation. Someone was getting angry. He yelled, asking what that woman was doing with her eyes half open. He looked furious. A drumstick slammed against a massive drum. The loud sound echoed through the area, signaling the start of something big. At the same time, everyone looked up towards the stage, curious about what was about to happen. They were all wondering what was going to happen next. Footsteps approached the stage. Someone important was about to make an appearance. Someone shouted, wondering who that guy was. The man on the stage looked important. The man on the stage announced that the dragons and phoenixes were gathered there. Everyone was listening intently to what he had to say. Bong Su-chan congratulated everyone for clearing the first gate. The Northern Heaven Supreme family elder looked pretty pleased with how things were going. The crowd looked up, clearly impressed. They were all murmuring in amazement about what they had just seen. The whole crowd was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was eager to see what would happen next. Zhang Charian exclaimed that he had been right all along and that they had passed. She looked really happy. Someone shouted for them to wait and come back. They were told to return immediately. Suddenly, Li Jian interrupted, declaring that he had something to say. He stood confidently in the doorway, drawing everyone's attention. Zhang Charian looked surprised, recognizing him. She seemed a little worried about what he was about to do. Meanwhile, the young man stared intently. Someone in the crowd suddenly yelled that the exam was unacceptable. He looked absolutely furious, his face red with anger. The crowd started murmuring, and another voice chimed in, declaring that there were people present who should have failed. The accusation hung in the air, making everyone uneasy. From the back of the room, a man asked what all the commotion was about. He wondered aloud if the exam results were being questioned. The older man narrowed his eyes, clearly displeased by the outburst. He questioned if someone dared to challenge the validity of the exam. The first guy explained that when they entered, the host clearly instructed them not to touch anything. He insisted that they were simply following those instructions, nothing more. One of the guys guys pointed out that those who broke the rules should be kicked out. He seemed really serious about it, not backing down at all. The crowd agreed with him, shouting that he was right, and the exam was unfair. They were all worked up, making a huge fuss about it. The protest got louder as more people started yelling that the situation was unacceptable. They looked furious, their faces showing how upset they were. The crowd kept chanting that the exam was unacceptable, their voices echoing through the hall. An authority figure watched from above, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise, telling everyone to stop whining. The guy looked annoyed, like he had no patience for their complaints. The guy looked furious, his face red with anger, as he asked if they thought Jonghu was some kind of joke. He seemed ready to explode at any moment. The woman turned to the other and warned that they never knew what might happen in Jonghu. She told her to keep her eyes open and be on guard at all times. The man scolded her, saying she had been careless and that it all started the moment they walked in. Meanwhile, the girl started crying, clearly feeling bad about messing up. The voice sarcastically asked who they would complain to if they died. The ruler of hell, Yama. The guy challenged them, asking if they weren't ashamed in front of those who came all the way there after solving that mystery. He seemed pretty disgusted with their behavior. The group found themselves surrounded, spears blocking their path forward. They looked around nervously, realizing they were trapped. Juk Legion's face was shown as someone wondered how he knew. The person wanted to know how he knew that the incense burner was the clue. The woman asked if it was just a coincidence. She looked intently at Legion, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Legion responded that there was no such thing as coincidence in Jonghu. He spoke with confidence, as if he knew everything. The woman seemed lost in thought as she considered Jonghu. She looked worried about what was to come. One of the people admitted that it was way more scary than they thought. He added that it was also way more cruel. It seemed that they had only followed instructions, but now they regretted it. One of the three people agreed, saying that it was way more despicable than they thought. They looked at each other, realizing the gravity of the situation. The mood was tense. The man admitted that if he were with someone other than Legion, he would be in trouble. He looked relieved that he was with Jiok Legion instead of anyone else. One of them suggested that they should go now, saying there was no other way. The other agreed, calling him elder brother. They seemed determined to leave. The face smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. It was a smile that promised trouble. The man grinned menacingly, warning them that they would thank the heavens for being eliminated that day. His eyes were filled with malice. He continued, saying that the Dragon and Phoenix Tong family were going to turn into hell. It looked like he was about to make a big move. The sky was a mix of colors, as if something big was about to happen. Jiok Legion held out a stick with some meat on it. He offered it to someone. Smiling, someone took a bite of the food. They chewed thoughtfully, not saying anything. The woman smiled, saying that the food was very tasty. She looked genuinely happy to be eating it. Jiok Legion grinned, agreeing that it was awesome. He held out the stick with more food, offering it to her. Jiok Legion told them that even though it was the same meat, it tasted way better when he grilled it. He seemed proud of his cooking skills. Nearby, Jung Seryun was eating too. Jiok Legion explained that his mother was perfect, except she couldn't cook. So, to avoid cheap tastes, he had to learn himself. He looked very serious about his food. He believed that the joy of eating was the best among life's 3 greatest pleasures. Those 3, he said, were food, alcohol, and women. Seryun told Juk Legion that she understood after eating the food he cooked. She thought that he was even better than her. He nodded, pleased by the compliment. Juk Legion turned to Seryun, asking if she was enjoying the food. He told her to make sure she chewed it properly. It was so good, he said, that it melted in his mouth before he even chewed. Someone commented that they didn't remember the last time Seryun was so lively. She smiled softly, enjoying the moment. The narrator explained that Seryun was always so healthy, but at the age of 7, she suddenly fell ill. Even the most respected doctors couldn't find the cause of her sickness. Someone wondered if her illness would ever be cured. It just seemed to get worse with each passing day. Seryun looked worried, knowing her condition was worsening. Seryun commented that she usually hardly eats a spoonful. She thanked Juk Legion, calling him a talented young warrior and acknowledging that he had been a great help in passing the first round. Juk Legion, smiling confidently, told her that she was well aware of his capabilities. He added that she could rely on him for the second round as well. Someone thought that in the past, they would have thought he was bragging again, but now they were starting to think differently about the young man. Another person agreed, saying that he wasn't someone ordinary. She added that only a fool wouldn't comprehend that. Someone wondered who on earth Juk Legion really was. Juk Legion stood in a field of flowers, looking out at the horizon. The air was still, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the wind through the petals. He stared ahead, his expression unreadable. The young man seemed to be deep in thought. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to solve a difficult puzzle. He took a step forward, crushing the flowers beneath his boot. The action seemed deliberate, as if he were trying to make a statement. Joke Legion's eyes narrowed, and a determined look crossed his face. He looked ready to face whatever was coming. He started walking forward, his pace quickening with each step. The warrior didn't hesitate as he moved towards his goal. Suddenly, the ground exploded in a burst of energy. Chunks of earth and flower petals were sent flying in all directions, creating a cloud of dust and debris. The air crackled with energy as the debris continued to fly. The scene looked like a storm of earth and flowers, creating a chaotic and dangerous environment. The ground was littered with the remnants of the explosion. Broken pieces of earth and scattered flower petals covered the area, showing the force of what had just happened. Joke Legion glanced back, his expression serious. He seemed to be assessing the damage. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. He floated in the air, his clothes billowing around him. The young man looked calm and collected, as if he was completely unaffected by the explosion. Petals fell around him, and he couldn't help but smile. It looked like things were going exactly as he'd planned. He thought to himself that everything looked great. The young man was clearly pleased with the results of his actions. The gray-haired man was identified as Villa Master Hua. He stood with another man, both of them observing the situation. The woman declared that she would disarm the formation arts. Villa Master Hua watched her, seemingly confident in her abilities. The scene shifted, showing a landscape filled with abstract symbols. Below, a blue landscape with strange structures came into view. Villa Master Hua explained that the formation from before was the 9 Palaces exquisite flower formation. According to him, it was the lightest of the 3 formations installed in the manor. At the bottom of the screen, there were some wooden structures. Hua continued, saying that the second formation was the 5 elements and 7 stars formation. He added that the last formation was the Celestial King of Light formation. He seemed confident in his description of the formations. The Celestial King of Light formation was shown in detail. The text explained that once it was activated, no martial master could escape it unless they knew how to dismantle the formation. It looked like a pretty tough trap. Legion admitted that it must be a formidable formation indeed, but he told Villa Master Hua that he had one thing wrong. Hua looked at him, confused, and asked what he meant. Legion declared that there definitely existed a martial art that allowed someone to break a formation without knowing how to dismantle it. The young man looked confident as he spoke. The man looked off to the side, seemingly amused by something. He said that someday they would find out. The 2 figures walked away from the city. At the same time, they mentioned that besides the 3 formations, a mechanism called the 7-stepped path to the Grim Reaper would be installed. The 2 people continued to discuss their plans. They mentioned that major buildings were planned to be set up behind that, and construction would be done soon. The boots stepped forward onto the grass. With this, things were starting to come together. The 2 people smiled, looking confident. They declared that they were one step closer to forming the strongest and most impressive sect of Jianghu. Mu Yang looked down, a slight smile playing on his lips. At the same time, HWA looked up, a similar smile on her face, as if they were sharing a secret. HWA excitedly announced that they had found the Wind God's location, just like he had predicted. She added that she would have to pay him a visit tomorrow. Mu Yang looked down at her, curious. He asked why all of a sudden she would do that, and if there was anyone she wanted to offer it to. The Villa Master looked at Mu Yang, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. Mu Yang admitted that it was a bad habit to ask someone something when you already knew the answer, like he was testing her. He apologized, saying that he just couldn't stop himself. Joke Legion stared out at the night view, a thoughtful expression on his face. He admitted that the night always excited him, but he didn't know why. The young man wondered if there was a story he didn't know about, like falling into a well when he was 2. He added that he would have been trapped in the darkness for a day or 2. Mu Yang told him that nothing like that ever happened to him. He added that even if it was true, he would have crawled out of there himself. Joke Legion looked back at Mu Yang, a strange sadness in his eyes. He said that sometimes he hated that about himself, but insisted he was just kidding. Mu Yang looked down at the ground, waiting for Joke Legion to speak. He asked what the young master needed from him. Joke Legion looked up, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. He asked if he could have that light all to himself. The young master and Mu Yang stood together, the night air cool around them. The atmosphere felt quiet and contemplative. Mu Yang stared ahead, lost in thought. His expression was unreadable, but the scars on his face stood out in the dim light. Joke Legion gazed up at the brightly lit city, a smirk forming on his lips. He wondered who in Jianghu could do a better job than him.